Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. We are down at the Giberson Garden down in Athens, Georgia. If you're interested in seeing a bigger version of this garden, there's a playlist on the channel called Giberson Garden. I'll link it down below this video. And Ram has a YouTube channel as well if you want to go and check out her channel where she's showing off this garden pretty frequently. And we're back down here, and normally, you know, I'll do some sort of big walk around in the garden, but I actually wanted to kind of concentrate in a video on shrubs and some small trees that have been limbed way up in this garden to kind of create opportunity to tuck things up under them. So originally, this was a fairly wooded lot, and some trees they took some trees down, and then the other trees that were here were limbed way up so that you could get light up under them. So it's still a woodland, but you know, with that high shade, all of a sudden you can start mixing things. And one of the crazy things about this garden is you'll see things that need a lot of sun mixed with things that need typically a lot of shade. This high shade allows for a lot of reflective light. Then there were shrubs put in here and small Japanese maples that were put in this garden, and then over time those have stretched up, and she's limbed them up into trees, and then she's put another layer up under it. And so that is the amazing thing about this garden is how well it's layered. You know, right from ground covers to mid-sized shrubs to kind of medium-sized shrubs that have been limbed up just a bit, and then taller growing shrubs that have been limbed way up into small trees. And so we'll just go through some of the trees. They're just right here in this one space. This is a lower corner of a garden. This would be most people's forgotten area in their garden. It's like the furthest thing from the house in this lower area. And I did another video down here where water had, you know, kind of cut through this area in the past. And there's a series of waterworks up at the top, and then you come down to this fountain below, which you can hear in the background. But there's a Hinoki cypress right here that you can see that has over time been limbed up. It's got two trunks. Hinokis have super straight trunks on them with really interesting trunks. And it's got a couple branches coming out over the water. It almost has a Japanese garden feel to it. And Hinoki cypresses will just become more interesting in time. But this one, again, has been lifted up. And now it's, I don't know how tall it is up there, maybe 24 feet, something like that. There's a native azalea right here. And this is kind of how they grow in the woodlands, you know, around the southeast, into small trees in woodland areas. But we have them in our gardens a lot of times. You know, people end up trying to keep them lower, try to tame them. But this one has just been allowed to be limbed up and then underplanted with various ground covers all around them, all of these plants. But also it ends up taking on a look that's, again, it's similar to a Japanese garden. You know, this Japanese maple here is a tree, but it's been limbed up extra high to allow some light under here, which has allowed for a lot of other things. Her purple loropetalum are purple back here, despite being next to an oak leaf hydrangea and an acuba on both sides of it. I would expect that loropetalum to be green in this much if these trees weren't limbed up like they are and allowing this much light into this space. So that's, you know, just an interesting observation in this garden, is seeing all these mixed things. Behind Steph here is a whole nother row. We'll figure out how to swing around for that, and I'll step into here. So this is a Japanese camellia, so Camellia japonica. There's a bunch of Camellia sasanquas and japonicas in this garden. Almost all of them over time have been limbed up into small trees. A lot of people will prune these from the top and keep them as shrubs with the limbs all the way to the base forever. But again, for her, it's just the thing has limbed itself up, or she's helped limb it up, and then this fatsia here is underplanting it. So something that really needs quite a bit of shade is now protected by that Camellia japonica. Even in this container, there's, you know, a magnolia that's, you know, limbed up in this container to making it more interesting. It would have had fragrant flowers on it a week or two ago. Next to that is a Fothergilla, native southeastern native plant. Beautiful, gets beautiful flowers earlier in the season, much earlier in the season, and then beautiful, beautiful fall color but you can see this one's just been allowed to grow like it would naturally grow. And rather than fighting to keep it as a meatball, you know, or keep it as the ornamental plant that you bought in the 3-gallon pot that was this big when it went in the ground, or even smaller, rather than fight that and fight that and fight that, it's just been allowed to just become the small, you know, a large shrub or a small ornamental tree. And then it's underplanted with a big leaf hydrangea, underplanted with these plum yews. Just an interesting layering. Even this variegated pittosporum, another example of a plant that's in the process of being limbed up, and it's underplanted with these dwarf plum yews. I guess one of them looks like maybe it's Duke Gardens, and then this is the dwarf plum yews right here, the ground cover ones, and then this one is obviously one that gets 3 or 4 feet. But you can see that layering coming up, and then up above it, probably when it was planted, this is a fern spray hinoki cypress. Back when this thing was planted, it's got 5 trunks, 5 beautiful trunks going up, that reddish bark on it, and again, been limbed up. I bet when it was planted, it was like the only thing that was in this space, okay? And then it was, as it came up and was limbed up, this pittosporum was planted, and then something else and something else is layered underneath them. Just the other side of the spot that I started this on is a Fortune's Osmanthus. And you can see, again, this is another one that, you know, a lot of times you'll see just full right down to the ground. They'll get the fragrant flowers on them, just like fragrance Osmanthus, but it has a serrated leaf that looks like it'd be wicked, but it's actually not. A lot of times these are called false hollies as a common name, but that's Fortune's Osmanthus, and it's got this kind of lollipop shape up on the top of it. Beautiful shiny foliage. These don't get really, you know, any real problems. It's got 4 trunks down here at the bottom, and just, we're doing the same thing in our small garden. This is a giant garden here, but you know, our tiny garden in Raleigh, this gives us the opportunity, you know, once this came, you know, was limbed up like this, to, you know, underplant it with other things. This is an interesting Philadelphus or mock orange that's been just allowed to limb itself up into a small tree, really. It's stretching for the light, but she's just kind of gone with it. And it's underplanted with ginger, it's underplanted with anemones back here, there's a cryptomeria underneath it on the other side, all kinds of things going on. But what's cool about this mock orange is this exfoliating bark that you wouldn't even know it had if you were just trying to keep your mock orange as a small, you know, as a small plant in the garden. But it's got beautiful exfoliating bark, kind of a reddish hue to the actual bark on the tree. It will have already bloomed once. It's got a couple flowers on it I can still see. May get some residual flowers on it later in the season, but again, just allowed to limb itself up, or it's been limbed up, and now it's, you know, just part of one of the layers here, a part of the layering here in this beautiful garden. This was an interesting one, and I showed Flying Dragon Poncirus not that long ago at a park in Raleigh. This is like a contorted trifoliate orange or hardy orange. A lot of times they're, you know, the stems are super angular on these, but this one has that contorted look to it. But she's limbed this thing up into a tree, which is probably the best thing to do with it. That way it doesn't have these wicked thorns all the way down to the ground. It's absolutely full of fruit. And I used to collect the fruit on these things. You bust those things open in the fall, or as they're falling off in the fall, and then clean the seed on it, store it, and germinate them in the spring. Sold lots and lots of Flying Dragon Poncirus. People just never seen it before when I had them at the farmer's market with that super contorted habit. When I was selling them, they were this tall, just a couple, you know, few contorted branches coming out on them. But you can see this one has 3 trunks, and it's a small tree. Again, make sure you're wearing some protective gear on the day that you prune the Poncirus or get the Poncirus under control. The fruit is, so it's really, really super sticky, and will just turn your face inside out. It feels like it's so bitter. It's kind of almost funny. There are lots of magnolias, and you know, the magnolias are definitely going to limb themselves up in time, especially in this understory. There's a river birch and larger Japanese maple behind it that are allowing it to stretch, and she's again just going with it and underplanting it with, you know, gardenias and azaleas and hosta and lots of different things here. There's a lot of conifers, a lot of various conifers out here. Camellias, lots of arborvitae, just various ones that, you know, she probably bought as little 3-gallon containers 20 years ago or whatever, and then they've stretched, and, you know, she's just gone with it again and allowed, you know, lots of things to fill in underneath or planted underneath. But these Nellie Stevens, the hollies definitely are one of the things that steal the show in this garden. There's 2 of them side by side, these big stone path that comes through. There's a fountain behind one and another fountain down the alley, but these are the kind of the invitation down here into this lower part of this garden. The golden bamboo that's in all the videos we shoot right across from it, but you come between these 2 Nellie R. Stevens hollies that have, again, been limbed up into trees. And again, most people are pruning and shearing these things where they're full right down to the ground, using them as screening plants. And they still could be screening plants, right? If you had a fence or something through here, or you had this underplanted with like this cryptomeria or anything else that's evergreen that's up to this height, you know, there's still good screening plants up above. I guess they'll sit here and shear them with some sort of a weed eater with a, you know, with an attachment on it of some kind to get these sheared up. But they're 2 lollipop Nellie R. Stevens. So people do call them fig trees. And this is definitely an example of a fig tree, because most of them can get as big as you want to let them get, really. I've seen ones that are 40 by 40, I mean, literally giant if they've never been pruned at all. But this one's just been pruned up into a small, well, not terribly small tree. The argument for keeping them lower would definitely be that that's going to be hard to get that fruit, right? It's pretty far up there, so it's absolutely loaded with fruit, but a good portion of it would be basically unpickable up there. A lot of this garden is built around other things that will come along and eat the fruit and the, you know, and appreciate the flowers and the fruit and all the other things too. So birds and squirrels and whatever the heck it is that comes along and samples them. But it is beautiful. The actual trunk of the tree, it's very magnolia-like, you know, in its structure, deciduous magnolia-like, but all the turns and twists, and then having this almost tropical-like foliage hanging above your head is really quite interesting. Any of the tree forms that you do, and you can see down here in the bottom of it, anytime you're training something into a tree that doesn't necessarily want to be a tree is going to sucker. And so there's some suckers down here at the bottom of them, which can be cut off, or you can allow another one to grow up. But you know, the conifers don't do that as much, although this cryptomeria does. That's a good example of this cryptomeria. There's a bunch of cryptomeria in this garden, from dwarf ones like Globosa nana, but they've been in the ground for so long that she's even limbed a Globosa nana up. If we find it again, I'll include it in the B-roll. Has a lot of plants in this garden. And then lots of other cryptomeria varieties, large growing ones, medium-sized growing ones, dwarf growing ones, but they've all been allowed to just either limb themselves up, or she's encouraged them to be, you know, tree forms. And then underneath there, you've got hellebores, you've got a pittosporum, some containers, some variegated liriope, lots of other things, underplanting. This cryptomeria, if this cryptomeria was sheared off like they would normally grow, it'd be out here on the sidewalk, it'd be blocking the sidewalk. But as it is now, it's not in the way as you walk by it, and it's beautiful. Here's a Chinese snowball, Viburnum, Viburnum macrocephalum. We have this one in our garden. We're tree farming it. I've got it as just a single trunk, or, you know, 1 liter coming up. This one is obviously a multi-trunk tree, and it's finished blooming. These will get lots of residual flowers in the fall. They do heavy spring blooming and sometimes flower just as heavily in the fall. She's also got Eastern snowball and a Japanese snowball here, and they've also been limbed up into small trees. Not a lot of difference between them, other than the Eastern snowball is a small, the Japanese snowball is kind of medium, and then the Chinese snowball is very vigorous and very tree-like this. It's raining on us right this minute as we're filming. There's this Thuja occidentalis to the side of it, and I don't know if this was just like a globe arborvitae or what it was originally, but it's been limbed up into this really super interesting tree. I had a globe arborvitae at my house on the corner, my old house on the corner of my house, and I kept it like 3 or 4 feet for about 10 years, and then it started to get woody like this. I wish I had thought of this, which was just to go with it and let it start growing. It keeps that globe kind of shape on the top, like it did when it was a little meatball, you know, next to my porch. And I could have just limbed it up like this. So looking back on that, I wish I had done that. Over here on the foundation is an older holly. Those are Foster hollies. They're not used as much anymore. They get quite big, narrow, upright habit. There's so many upright, narrow hollies. You know, Oakland and oak leaf and golden Oakland that I've shown, and so many others that it's kind of been displaced over time. But they're great plants, and you know, with the shearing that she's done on it, she's, you know, kept it really tight, compact habit up on top of it, and then limbed it up from below. And they're underplanted with dwarf Burford hollies and some Yopon hollies, our native Yopon hollies out here in front of it. This one's definitely super interesting. Those are pyracantha along the wall that have been boxed off, that have been, you know, limbed up into like a patio tree. I don't know how many were originally planted there. It looks like at least 2. And then they've grown between the 2 windows and below that 2nd story window, and just boxed off up there. Of course, they're thorny, you know, so pruning this thing is, you know, you'd want to prune it pretty often, and that way you're just pruning new growth all the time, which the thorns haven't hardened off on. But you can see where it had flowered. It has got a few fruit up there, so those will be red later in the season. But it took me a minute to identify. One time I've never seen a pyracantha cut like that. Of course, I've seen them vined and, you know, other shapes, but that one's super interesting. Another one I'd point out is a Japanese ligustrum in the corner, and because of the way it's being pruned and because of the way it's being sheared so frequently, after it flowers, it's being sheared so it's never setting fruit. So where this is an invasive plant, potentially, because it's constantly being manicured like this, it's not going to produce any seed that will become a problem. But that's really interesting tree form there. We'll wrap this up with this gold mop cypress, but before I talk about it, I would just say that a lot of these conifers and other things that you've seen tree formed, or, you know, have been allowed to just become these shrubs that we think of as shrubs a lot of times. Some of these things will, you know, become big in time, but a lot of times we're trying to keep them full to the ground or whatever. You know, one thing I would say is they weren't necessarily planted with the intent of limbing them up, but you plant something, and what you'll really notice with shrubs, yeah, I would say, you know, annuals are only good for 1 season. Obviously, they're annuals, right? They only live for a year and then they set seed and die. And then perennials, you know, a lot of our perennial flowers, you have to readdress them in like 3 to 5 years, something like that. Let's say you plant whatever it is. It's going to need to be dug out of the ground, divided, thinned out. Something is going to need to be worked on with them, right? On perennials, you know, herbaceous things. And then shrubs, I always figure there's about you know, and I do a lot of consultation work, and I can kind of guess when I see somebody's foundation plantings. I can go, yeah, they're about 20 years old, aren't they? Because that's the time when you start looking at them and they're a little tired looking, right? They're starting to just get a little worn out looking, and you're thinking, well, I could cut them back to the ground and start over and let them come back out from the ground, give them a second chance, pull them out, replace them, whatever it is. There's also the opportunity, though, to look at some of them and say, hey, what if I came in here and I actually pruned it up and I gave myself an opportunity to actually plant underneath it? So it's an opportunity, you know, that has been created in the garden, and this gold mop cypress would be a great example of this. I used to get folks that come to, you know, shop at the farmer's market. They wanted the gold mop cypress that stayed small. These things they get big. There's one at juniper level that's probably almost double this height of this one, and this one's probably 15, 16 feet. So it'll get as big as you want. I'd had a neighbor near me at the old house that kept his 24 inches tall for 20 some years. He'd shear them into little meatballs. But this is how it naturally wants to grow. And of course it's shading itself out down here, so the limbs are getting thinner, and you can make the decision to either, again, you can shear it. And I've cut one of these gold mop cypress really, really hard before. I mean, down to almost nothing, and they'll come back out from it. But this one has just been allowed to be limbed up. It's good. There's nandinas planted under it, liriope planted under it. All kinds of interesting things have again, opportunity, right? Look at some of these as opportunities and look at others as, it probably needs to be replaced or reset or whatever. So there you go. There's some of the layering, interesting layering in the Giberson garden down here in Athens, Georgia. Thank you guys so much for following along.